Welcome to the show today. My name is Douglas Gabriel. Today's presentation is on the karma of evil, white magic versus black magic. Now, this particular topic arose some decade ago when Tyler and I started our work in geopolitical realms. And people asked, well, since you're an exorcist, can't you help us get rid of the evil in the world? And it became kind of a mission of ours. So part of what we're doing with the series of from the works of Rudolf Steiner is to show you what good is. And today I'm going to talk about what evil is. And we get a lot of questions about evil, especially why is evil here? How long is it going to be here? Is it going to rule the day? Is it going to win? This battle between good and evil is the same thing as the battle between white magic and black magic. And some people get very upset when you say the word magic. But Rudolf Steiner actually had a philosophy he called ideal magic. In other words, we are all supposed to be white magicians fighting in this battle because the war in heaven has come to the earth. And that came to the earth when Ahriman, the beings of materialism, began to rule the world in 1840. Then in 1879, the Archangel Michael, the Archangel of the Sun, rose to his ascendancy or regency and became an archai, a time spirit. And now the battle is between Michael and the dragon, and this dragon is Ahriman, materialism. And so we have to now name the devil. When you're doing an exorcism, you first have to find out how the being got in there and who the being is, to address the being. So that's what we started doing in our geopolitical realm. We started to say, who are the real people who are behind the evil in today's world? Now, why would you have to focus on individuals? Because demons don't possess the air. They don't possess, they have to possess a person. So you have to name the person. And when you start thinking about this evil in the world, it becomes extraordinarily perplexing in our age. Because what you'll hear is that many people know that the elite rich are not only pedophiles, but that they have fomented war. So in fact, they are complicit with murder and that they do it for money. And you go, well, fine, okay, who is this? And then they'll always name the Rothschilds. And then they might name the Warburgs or, a couple other banksters. But basically, they don't know the true history. And once you know the history, you can then understand these things and you can free yourself from them. But until you know the history, till you know how this came about, you don't know the trick that the devil did to get you to sign in blood to become an automaton, to working every day, 5 days a week, and then on the weekend going into your extreme hedonistic expressions of having some pleasure that you think is freedom. It is amazing how entranced the world is by the beings who started all of this, by the human beings, as well as by the fallen gods and demons, you might call them, which I'm going to try to explain today. But to begin with, we have to just think for a second. What is evil? People now use the word evil to describe their politicians, to describe their school systems, to describe their doctors and their doctor treatments, to describe just about everything in the world where we should have respect and authority for that authority, or respect for the people in those positions, because they should actually be looking out for our welfare. You would think that any invention in today's modern world would have the human being at the core of it and say, is this going to hurt a human being? But let's just take one tiny instance of evil. Since electricity has been wired all over the earth and now it's wireless, every single advancement of electricity brings new illnesses. As a matter of fact, they are directly coincidental. So in 1913, it was the wiring of Europe that really created the Spanish flu, even though they started giving it out to in Fort Leavenworth as a vaccine, as an attempt to make people immune to certain disease. In fact, it created other diseases, as well as electrification creates evil. Well, who is in charge of electrification? Who's in charge of putting up the towers, the 5G, 6G, up to 10G for precision medicine? Who's in charge of that? Well, we need to know who's in charge before we can call them out, don't we? But when you look at it, you say, wait a second, nobody's in charge. You could blame it on DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. You could blame it on the Highlands Forum. You could blame it on the British Pilgrim Society. You can blame it on the British Crown agents or our politicians or our government. You can blame it on anybody you want. But when it comes down to it, look closely, as we have done in many, many cases, and we've called out the evil for what the evil is and who the evil has possessed. Now, let me make this perfectly clear. It's one of the things I like to emphasize the most when speaking about this topic. There is no such thing as a demon coming and possessing a human being that hasn't made a contract with that human being. And they usually say it's in blood, right? Well, it isn't blood because your ego, your I am, is in your blood. And the devil, Satan, Moloch, Melchizedek, Mephistopheles, any Ahriman, Lucifer, any name you want to give to the devil, it doesn't really matter. We can break that down, and I have studied those things because why? I was trained as an exorcist by the head exorcist in America for the Catholic Church when I was young. And so I went to many exorcisms, and so I know a lot about evil, but if you don't know an equal amount about good, then you get yourself in a tremendous amount of trouble trying to fight evil. Some people believe we're supposed to fight evil and win in our day. No, absolutely not. This evil is creating the bifurcation of humanity into what the Bible calls the goats and the sheep, or what the apocalypse calls those who have already been harvested by Christ, who is returned in the clouds with his sickle, and then those who are turned into wine through the grape squeezing of the grapes and making wine, right? So it's described in the Bible in many places what is going on here in our day, but that's because it was also going on in their day. The apocalypse isn't about a certain period of time in history. It is about an archetypal experience that happens to anyone who goes into the spiritual world. And so that's why all of the apocalypse documents that I know describe pretty much the same experience. And we put that in our books for people to understand. But the real question is, that is for initiates. But how about just the common person who's down here on the earth and doesn't, they're born into what they're born into. And as I always say, you are really programmed by your home, by your parents. And until you can become objective about it and sort out the good from the bad, the evil from the good, you're going to do what you were taught. Now, what is it we have been taught? One might think that the modern world is something very modern and that the evil in the modern world is something new. Well, we've given you many intelligence reports and written books on the evil in our day, artificial intelligence. And in this book that I'm speaking about, the karma of evil and white magic versus black magic, not only do we present for you, because it's been asked me many times, to give a version of an exorcism or prayers for protection that people can use in this day and age. And so I've provided that there. I've also provided basically calling for a moratorium or a manifesto on protecting human thinking. Because at this point, many people don't get to have human thinking, and they sure don't get to have angelic thinking, because why? They're worried about paying their bills. So let me, instead of doing what I was going to do, start from the beginning, let me go backwards in time. How is it that in our day, you can't survive without a credit card, a bank card, and basically being involved in what used to be a crime called usury, which is charging interest and exorbitant interest rates for loaning people money? Well, first off, if you're borrowing money, you probably don't have any money. So it's highly likely you're going to default. I mean, that's just simple logic. And if you're going to charge your credit cards up until the point that you can restructure it and put it into one credit card that gives you 30% interest, for the Catholics, that was a crime for hundreds and hundreds of years, for centuries. For many, many cultures, especially the cultures that started using coins and currency, which I'll describe here in a few minutes, It was a crime to charge interest. You can't charge interest. How is the person that you brought, let's say, for instance, well, I should describe this in modern and basically very old terms. Whatever you do for your work, and they give you money, whether it's fiat currency or whether it's metal species uh, currencies, or whatever it is, whether it's digital currency, whether it's a Bitcoin, whatever you get paid in, that money, when it goes into a currency, represents your work. It represents your willpower. It represents what you have done. In the past, that generally was the food that could be stored that most easily, which was grain. They could put grain into jars, and the jars actually had a very specific shape to them so that they would make sure that they would preserve the grain. And the grain was brought to the temple. Now, this is after the year 3000 BC. From 3000 BC on, we entered into a dark age, and the priests took over the temples that used to be not even temples. They were birthing kivas and birthing temples. And so when the priests got a hold of the temples, they said, we will hold your grain for you. And then it was fine. They needed the grain because the priests were supposed to figure out when to plant again, when was a good time to harvest. And if you did that wrong, then you starved and died. So the priesthood became very, very powerful in this sense. And the people would bring their grain. For instance, take Greece. On the Acropolis, there were 3 temples to Athena. One of them was simply to store the fruits and grains that could be preserved. People don't realize this. And one of them was a temple of culture, a temple of beauty, which was the temple of Nike. And Nike was a winged Athena who was very beautiful and is, I'll go there in a minute, the Palladium, I'll try to explain that. But anyway, it was a statue, actually, that was held in the hand of Athena in the larger of the 3 temples. And she was 27 feet tall, that Athena, and she was the warrior goddess. But one was a warrior. One had to do with fruits and the labor of the human being and their harvest. And the other one had to do with beauty. And this is true throughout all the ancient world. Most of the time when you find a god, he replaced a goddess starting in 2101 BC, is when the matriarchal culture kind of, it didn't fizzle out. It was warred against by the patriarchal culture. And you have a picture of that in the Trojan War. And Helen was not a person, or else she would have been 900 years old during the Trojan War. She was the statue of the Palladium, a statue of the goddess Athena in her form as Nike. And whoever had that statue of the Palladium was considered to be the culture that would rule the world. Well, these 3 goddesses, in most cases, almost all the ancient goddesses were triple, they were threefold, and they represented truth, beauty, and goodness. So in the case of Athena on the Acropolis, truth, beauty, and goodness. First off, truth is wisdom in your head. Beauty is that sense in your heart that knows when something is beautiful, and then you know it's right. And goodness is what you do with your limbs, what you do with your body, your actions, your deeds, your volition, your willpower. And so there's this 3 separations. That's why there were always 3 goddesses. That's why they were turned into the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Even though those are real beings, and I'm not saying that they subsumed them because they simply took it over, even though that's true in the case of many, many goddesses who were turned into gods in the Greek culture or cultures before that, which happened a lot in Mesopotamia where banking started, and I'll mention that in a second. But what is truth, beauty, and goodness? Well, truth, beauty, and goodness are these 3 soul capacities that the human being has. So that's why the Greeks had so much beauty around them, why they started philosophy in such a profound way, and why their deeds conquered the world, because of their astounding courage and because of their training and because of their inventions. So in fact, we have now, where is truth, beauty, and goodness in our age? There's no more truth. We live in a post-truth age. That's why we live in an evil age. That's the karma of untruthfulness, as Rudolf Steiner calls it. If you're going to lie, you first create basically beings that hang around you that are very, very evil beings. And these beings go through 3 steps. First off, they can appear as they're not demons until they turn into laws. Before that, they're a specter. So when someone tells you a lie, a specter is created around them. And it's actually a living being of untruthfulness. It's living darkness. And the more that lie affects other people, the more bad karma the person got that gave the lie out. Now, the person who gave the lie out can go back and say, I lied, and try to take it back. And some of that karma they can rectify before they die. Otherwise, they're going to have to pay for it. So every lie you tell, even to yourself, whether it's out loud or whether you hear it inside, it doesn't matter. That lie creates a specter. And that's an elemental being of darkness. And then if you tell the lie more and it affects more people, then it becomes what's called a phantom, what most people would call a ghost. But really, it's a phantom of lies, a phantom of dark, living ugliness. It's the opposite of truth, the opposite of beauty, the opposite of good. And when these phantoms start to roam around, they become so real that it's kind of like when you tell somebody something that you heard on the internet because you read the headline and you actually didn't do your homework, and then it went out to all your friends and then you made them all believe it. Well, then you find out later it's absolutely a lie. For instance, how many people have heard that on August the 2nd is going to be the largest eclipse we've had in 100 years? Well, yeah, in 2 years from now. But if you are reading this and you become convinced of this, then it's actually a phantom. It's a being. It has its own willpower that was created by the elemental force that went out. And then every person who believed it, this lie, it ate part of them. Literally, it ate part of their ego. And then that makes the phantom bigger. And that's why evil people, when you look at them clairvoyantly, they have horrible elementals around them. They have specters and they have phantoms. Now, when you turn it into a law, as we have in America, for instance, the pandemic and all preparedness law, which was ratified 6 times, it's clearly evil. And now people are finally waking up to it after all that has happened. Because once you put a lie in and then the lie goes out long enough that many people are influenced by it, it becomes a phantom. Then when you turn it into a demon, there's nothing you can do. It became a law. You have to obey the law or else there's punishment for the law. But the law is evil. So when we started our geopolitical work, people would say, how is it that you know these things? In those days, 10 years ago, all you had to do is go over into any mainstream media lie and assume it's the opposite. And don't look for the lie, look for the opposite, and then you'll find it. And it always comes back to basically the same people. It's shocking. We once said if we could just get rid of about 50, 60 people in America, we'd have American sovereignty back. But these 50 or 60 people now have become every politician that I know in Washington, D.C., every judge on a bench anywhere in America, in any level of the court, and basically every banker and anyone having anything to do with taxes or money or all the things that bind you as an economic slave. Because why? That's the opposite of truth, beauty, and goodness, isn't it? Now, how did that happen? How did we get to the point that when somebody says to me, this horrible thing they're doing now, and then I used to scream, it should be illegal. Now I don't. Now I scream, I'm sure it is legal. It is legal. All these tricks that have gone back literally, let's see, how long would that be? That would be almost 4,000 years since the Hammurabi Code was written in 1900 BC. So since that time, laws have been the place where demons took up their homes. So when you look at the laws in America, just think of this. I'll just give you a few examples of the evil in America. A bad president like we just recently saw gives pardons out to criminals. Okay, so they go through the whole system where they get judged, the jury of their peers, they get convicted, they might even go to jail for a life sentence, and the president can come along and pardon them. Or the president can take his actions within his own realm of the executive, and then the Supreme Court can rule against it, or many lower courts, as we're seeing all the time. This is called lawfare. It's warfare in the courts. Or we could see happening in our own Congress that dual citizenships, we can see payoffs, we can see corporations using super PACs to pay people to stay in office for a long time, who then become the insider traders who make more money than anybody else on the stock market, which of course is gambling, which of course in the old days was evil. Usury was evil. Gambling is evil. Bearing false witness is evil, telling a lie. And all of the 7 deadly sins that have been preached against by every religion I know of, certainly every traditional religion, and they all preach against the 7 deadly sins and for the 7 heavenly virtues. And so if you're not focused on those, then basically, if you get caught up into becoming an economic slave, then you're going to be wondering how this happened, and it's going to be very, very, very upsetting to you. But if you know where it came from and you can see the old tricks, there's 1,000 ways that you can free yourself of those things. So let's go back for a minute. But, I should also mention just a couple other things. And I'm using notes today because this book that I'm talking about, The Karma of Evil, White Magic versus Black Magic, we have held off until the end of this series because I didn't think people were ready to hear this. Now, for the last 10 years, we've been working with others to basically reveal the Babylonian banksters that we still live underneath their rules, believe it or not, to this very day. And we also, the people who make those rules are people who, by their actions each day, which whatever you do every day, I consider your worship. Whatever you think about, that's your God. And the love that comes through your heart is God acting in you. It's real simple. So these people that I'm talking about spend all their time thinking about what? The love of money. And they also think about how they can live longer. And if that means killing others so they can live longer, no problem. Or if they can in any way cheat death, no problem. If they can increase their wealth, yes, fine. And if people have to die for that, that's no problem. And they've been bred in these corporatocracy lineage families, bankster families. I like to call them banksters because they're gangsters using banking tools, they call them. Yeah, they're tools, okay. They're tools of war against human beings, because when you attack a person's economy, you attack their willpower. When you attack their way to make money, but then again, this has been going on for so long that I'm going to have to describe it now, but this wasn't done easily. There have been secret brotherhoods ever since we went into the dark age of Kali Yuga in 3000 BC up until the time of 1900. For 5,000 years, we were in a dark age. And 1,000 years into it, basically then the men started war. There were no names for wars. There were no walls in the ancient days. There was no one needing to protect themselves from other warring tribes. No one was coming to steal their harvest. War started only, as we know, in about 3000 BC. And even then, this is practically still prehistory. And we don't know much about those days, but we do know clearly, if you follow the religious inclinations of all world religions, you will find that there was a matriarchy, and that matriarchy was taken over by a patriarchy, and that the men became the priests and the women became the priestesses who were the oracles. So they still knew in those days that the women knew what was going on, but the secret brotherhoods whether we're calling them masonry. Some would say they were bad. In today's age, they're not as bad as they used to be. Some would say, of course, then that the Pilgrim Society or the British imperialists or the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company, all these different groups were prototypes for perfecting the evil in our economic realm. And so there were secret brotherhoods. And these brotherhoods were all focused on one thing: taking away your ability to perceive the spiritual world. Because the spiritual world is better than anything you can do economically. And when you get there, you'll find truth, beauty, and goodness in all realms. And it can be activated in yourself, in your thinking, feeling, and willing. But there are, in fact, brotherhoods, and most of them are bankers who became the fomenters of war. The fomenters and the beneficiaries of war were bankers. And this became utterly true as we came more into the modern age. You literally had what was called a court Jew who, throughout all of Europe, provided the money for wars. Now, first off, the word Jew is not a word. That's a derogatory term. So I'm not going to use that. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a Jew. And when you say Judaic, well, then you're talking about one tribe of the 12 tribes. So let's not get confused. And then if you talk about southern Israel, or what was left of Israel that went into the Babylonian captivity, that's the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Judah, and a little bit of the Levites. Remember, the Jews, these word Jew, you can't use the word Jew. There's no such thing. And there's no such thing as a Hebrew people. It's complete nonsense. Hebrew is a language. Proto-Hebraic was used in Canaan. It was used by the Phoenicians. It was used by the Palestinians, by the people in northwestern Turkey, the Aram people. But essentially, there's no such thing as a Hebrew person. Now, remember that Abraham, who the supposed Hebrew, so I'd rather use the word Hebrew than Jew, but you really can't use any of those. You need to say the followers of Abraham, the followers of the Talmud, the followers of the Mishnah, the followers of the Zohar, the Sephardic refugees from Spain that went into Italy that became the Sephardic Jews. They call them Jews. I don't know why they use a derogatory term and why anyone would ever say that. The Ashkenazi Jews, or that's what they call themselves? No, there's no such thing. That we can describe that in great history detail, because the example from the Old Testament was Esther married Ahasuerus, the Persian king. It wasn't king. He was a Turk, and he was in the last of the Turkish Khangenites on the western end of the Silk Road. And that king, who had nothing to do with supposed Jews or Hebrews or whatever you want to call them, or the diaspora, he had nothing to do with that. He just saw that using the shekel and using the wonderful merchant bankers that had come out of Babylon, called the Radanites, who lived in a separate area of Babylon, and they don't know whether they also lived in Assyria, but we know for sure that the Radanites in Babylon were indeed Chaldean people who called themselves the people of Abraham. Well, Abraham wasn't Chaldean. Abraham was a Canaanite. And so he was an Akkadian. He was Semitic. But the Chaldeans were Indo-Aryan. So when you say Abraham, you were talking about a person who stood between two different worlds. And that's why his progeny, his children, ended up being the children of Israel and the Muslims, the Arab Semites who became the Muslims. So Abraham is considered the father of the Jews. I hate that word. The father of the Muslims and the father of the Christians. Well, that's not true either. Because you see, in Babylon, when Abraham was there and he left Canaan, he first off was a follower of Sumeria, not the Akkadians. He rejected the Akkadians, which are the Semites, and he went with the teachings of the Sumerians, and so did many of the Chaldeans. And they worshiped demons as well as gods. And so when you talk about Baal, or when you talk about Moloch or Mammon, which in many, especially in the Old Testament, it refers to Mammon as the spirit of money. And it says, the love of money is the source of all evil, and you can't love money and God at the same time. And all these things the Hebrews preached, or the Old Testament preached, and those people did not do it. And so it's absolutely funny that you get a guy from Canaan, probably even further than that, West Turkey. He's probably from Aram, goes to Chaldea, takes up the teachings of the Sumerians, and then rejects them, and then tries to act as if he is more like an Assyrian, not a Chaldean, Babylonian, Sumerian, though he is in fact Semitic. And Semitic is not Hebrew. They actually stopped using Proto-Hebraic and the Hebraic language after a while, the Canaanites, and then later the Hittites and the Hyksos, all these different people. If you don't know this history, you don't know what you're dealing with. So when people say, oh, they don't like the Jews, which Jews? What are you talking about? They're as different as you can possibly imagine. If you are a follower of the Talmud, then you took the Abrahamic code, which were some of the first laws made in 1900 BC. Now, later the Assyrians took some of them, and the Sumerians basically had like curses. They had the opposite of it. So when you talk about the 10 Commandments, that wasn't the Hebrews who created that. That was the opposite of the demon worship of the Sumerians. So when you start to parse this stuff out, you'll go, well, wait a second. What are you talking about? Abraham was the father of all of them, and Moses came out. No, he did not. Abraham left Chaldea, went to Israel, buried his wife there, and then claimed before that God had told him in 3 different places that he was going to inherit all of Palestine, all of the Canaanites land, the Phoenician land, and so on and so forth. It's like, well, where did he get the right to do that? Well, because he was one of them to begin with. And then he went and learned about money. Now here we get into some really strange areas. When you talk about the diaspora of the Jews, they continue to mention this. Well, that was over long before the Babylonian 2 captivities, and they weren't captivities. When the people from Israel they asked 7,000 of their top leaders to come to Babylon. Basically, those people moved into a city, a little section near the Tigris and Euphrates, near the city Ur. And what did they do? Well, that's where one of the sites of Radon. It was really a ghetto. It was a place where the Jews lived. But the Jews were already trained by the Assyrians. And some of them had returned to Israel. So by the time then they were taken to Babylon, they were the bankers. They were tax collectors. They were the merchants. They were the merchant bankers. They invented through the Talmud laws that supported what Hammurabi started as basically evil economic laws. But they got twisted by the Radanites to the point that if you didn't pay back a loan with illegal usury, because the Babylonians didn't start that, the Assyrians didn't start that. No, this was started by the banksters in Babylon at the time that it was ruled by Chaldeans. So the Chaldean Babylonians, who were also partially Assyrians, so they were Persian, Aryan, they were the opposite of the Turanians that were the Sumerians, who Rudolf Steiner said were the people who were still involved in Atlantean black magic right up until the end. So you're talking about the worst black magic ever created on the face of the earth. Last time their black magic helped sink the island of Atlantis by basically misusing the forces of nature and by crossbreeding animals and humans. And so what do you see happening in Chaldea? There, when the Chaldeans ruled Babylon, which is Mesopotamia, where basically they believe all agriculture started there, but that's not true. It started in a few other places. But the major source of agriculture being started was the Mesopotamia. It was a fertile crescent. It was so beautiful. It was a paradise. But when the Chaldeans got a hold of being in charge of it, they said, we don't like the Sogdians who are Persians, being in control of the Silk Road that led all the way to China, and were bringing things to. Remember that the gift of one of the greatest gifts of the Chinese to the Phoenicians was the cipher, the zero, and the base 10 number system, which got them out of counting sticks and rope and knots on ropes so they could actually do merchant trade. That's why the Phoenicians and later the Carthaginians, but particularly the Phoenicians, ruled the Mediterranean in terms of commerce. And they also ruled coinage. And they also were able to do that because they had a phonetic language called Proto-Hebraic, which was changed to Hebraic, which was changed to other languages, which then they eventually used for commerce. So the Abrahamic, Talmudic believers who twisted up the Hammurabi Code so that it would put people in jail for not paying back the bank money, or if you didn't pay your taxes. The Radanites collected taxes. They also did land management, and no one was checking their work. And so basically they completely took over that area. And then they decided, well, what's the wealth coming here into Babylon and into Persia, what we call Persia today? It comes through the Silk Road, and the Sogdian Persians were taking care of it. So basically the Jews infiltrated the Sogdians, infiltrated the Silk Road, and in the end basically took it over. Well, they did the same thing with their daughters. Now, as you probably know, people hate it when I say this, but there's no one on the face of the earth who is 100% Israeli, or you could call it whatever you want, but there's no such thing. You have Semitic or Semitic blood from the Levant, or Levantine Semitic blood. That's as close as you can get to saying that you are an original Abrahamic or Mosaic, from the line of Moses, a Jew, or whatever you wanted to call them. I call them Babylonian Radanites because basically, even as I just pointed out, the Ashkenazis were Babylonian Radanites. The supposed Jews that followed along the Roman trading routes all the way into Europe, all the way, all the way into Britain, all over the world, all the way to China. Why did they do that? Because they were in control of currency. Now, how do we know that? Very simple. Who had the most gold in human history? Solomon, from the mines of Ophir. He had so much wealth that he made the king of Tyre, who was considered to be the wealthiest king of all history, who Solomon used King Tyre's builder, Hiram Abiff, to come and build Solomon's temple. And on the inside of Solomon's temple were all these gold shields, so that all the walls were covered with these gold shields, and all the ornaments and all the candlesticks and everything was gold. But what happened to that gold? Did the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews, whatever you wish to call them, ever make gold coins? No. So how is it that they would bring back shiploads of gold every year to Solomon? And he was, of course, the richest and wisest man on earth. And of course, he broke every single rule that was given in the Old Testament. And that's the reason that, they were punished according to them, according to their own history. He had, hundreds of wives, and they were pagans. And of course, he was told that he can't worship pagans. Well, technically, if you want to talk about this, it's going to make some people very upset, because Solomon not only was the richest man in the world and stole the gold of Africa, the Ophir mines, the Solomon mines, and outstretched even the wealth of the king of Tyre, but he also broke every rule that was given to them. He built a palace. He was told not to. They were supposed to have a tent for their temple, but no, he built a temple. He built a palace. He had hundreds and hundreds of wives who were pagans and didn't believe in the one God, the Jewish God, the Yahweh. And then what happened? Oh, well, not too long after that, a few hundred years after that, all of a sudden, some Assyrians who were supposedly from Israel and 7,000 whatever you would want to call them, Solomonites, came from Israel and took over Babylon under the auspices of being Chaldean. And of course, they had the gold of Solomon. And so they had the wealth that started the original banks. And this is all well known. The original first banks that charged interest were in Babylon, and they were Babylonian Radanites. Those same exact rules of usury apply today. If you don't pay your IRS tax bill, you can go to jail. If you don't pay things, you can go to small claims court, or large claims, you can go to jail. So money is more important than your freedom. And it doesn't matter when you go before a court, you won't find the truth, so there'll be no truth there. There'll be no goodness there, and there'll be no beauty there. So in today's world, money rules. Why? Because truth used to be in the temples. When money coins came into the temples and they started to replace grain and they started to become banks, temples started to become banks, that was the end of any wisdom in any religion. Now, you can find the religion there, but it isn't because the people who are there are teaching it properly. And that's what I'm putting out as an idea. And then how about beauty? What happened to beauty? Oh, the Chaldeans, when they got to Babylon in the supposed first and second Babylonian captivity, what did the people there say about them? They said, we hate these Babylonian Radanites, that's what I'll call them, because they spend all their time in the temple of Ishtar having sex with the priestesses. And they're not supposed to do that. And they pay them. And they also charge such interest rates and usury that they're killing people. So the Babylonians, after just a few years of the Babylonian Radanites taking over for taxes, lands, collecting taxes, banks, commerce, they said, these Babylonian Radanites are so bad, we have to just basically, because they made rules upon rules and laws upon laws. And then the Babylonians said, well, how did they even get in power? How did this happen? And so they would complain about them. And they would say that they're really vicious, awful people who say they worship a god, but obviously they don't. They spend all their time worshiping devils and demons and loving money. And so essentially they had to develop what was then later the Hebrew faith, or the Old Testament faith, called the year of the Jubilee. They had to forgive everybody's sins every once in a while because everyone was going to jail, called debtor's prison. Why? Because they didn't pay their taxes on their land. And the people collecting the taxes made sure that they didn't. So the first really serious economic wars happened in Babylon underneath the control of the Chaldean Babylonian Radanites. And they were vicious. They would not only put the father in jail, and when you were in jail, you had to work, but here comes the trick. This is the trick still being used today. They loaned someone money knowing they couldn't pay it back. They charged them a horrible interest rate, which should be illegal. When they couldn't pay it back, they put that person in jail and then paid them a tiny bit of money a day so they could never pay back the debt. No matter how small the debt was, doesn't matter. Couldn't pay it back. Impossible to pay it back. You cannot pay back the debt from debtor's prison, period. And then when you died because they overworked you on the land that they confiscated, these Babylonian Radanites, from people who couldn't pay the taxes on the land, then they worked the land with the slaves from debtor prison until they killed them. And then the law said, the Talmudic law said, they could go then for the children of the person owing the debt or the wife of the person owing the debt. And they do the same thing to them and kill them too so they could take their land. Does this sound familiar? This is the same exact thing happening in America. Why do we have to keep paying taxes on a house that is paid off? When you get no services living out in the country, so who takes the money? Or when you have no children, you're paying millages for schools. Or you can sometimes get a tax on a tax on a tax on a tax in America. 4 times you can be taxed on the same exact money or the same exact thing over and over and over again. Okay, well, Shylock. Does that sound familiar? A pound of flesh? This is literal, folks. And how it come into Italy and Venice, that's another story. But basically, those were what were called the Sephardic Jews who came out of Spain, and they were kicked out in 1492. Along with the Muslims, they finally defeated them. And then, so that most of those Spanish Sephardic Jews went into Italy, and the people who wrote their new religious order and their doctrine and their dogma weren't even Jews. I just love it. And so every single Jewish sect has different rules they follow. And that's why the Talmud is just pure evil, because it took the Babylonian laws, which weren't nice, the laws of Hammurabi, and basically turned them into the laws of the Sumerians, demon laws. It's called antinomianism, when it was then done by some Jews, Frankish Jews and Sabbatean Jews. They believed that they needed to break all 10 commandments as fast as they could so that the Messiah would come, because it was said the Messiah won't come until the desecration of the temple and all these things. And so they literally went out and formed a religion that was to break all of the 10 commandments and to worship the devil and to basically commit every sin that you can do on the path to hell through the 7 deadly sins. Okay, that started basically seriously started. It started with the first captivity in Assyria, but then the second and third captivities in Babylon. By the first captivity in Babylon, full on, the Babylonian Radanites controlled banking. Now, how does that turn into today's world? We have the same rules. We have the same usury. We have the same, as it developed, the Babylonian Radanites spread into Europe. And then they started in Venice, because Jews could loan money at an interest rate, but Catholics couldn't and Christians couldn't. Why? Because it was a sin. It was a horrible, horrible sin. It killed people, okay? It was murder, essentially. It's economic murder. So when truth and beauty were taken out of the temple and out of religion, and religion became solely economic, as Rudolf Steiner points out, we do not have anymore a religion or a wisdom center. You have to do that on your own, because they've all been defiled. And we don't have beauty anymore. We have now been taught that a lie is truth, that beauty is ugly, ugly is beauty, and that we must sink to the lowest common denominator and accept the worst behavior that any human can have and allow that to be part of their freedoms. That's where we're at. And in the economic realm, we have followed the Babylonian Radanites absolutely to the T. And if you follow their development, you will see the development of warlord banking and the worship of Mammon. That's one of the chapters. Warlord banking. If you want, we were asked from the beginning, when we started writing for this place, it was almost like a competition that they do every day, and they say how many hits you got, who got more hits, and so on and so forth. So people started saying, well, can you explain some of this stuff to us? Because all we hear is Illuminati. It's the Illuminati. Okay, Adam Weishaupt was paid by the Rothschilds to create a Masonic lodge for Jews. Not really Jews, Babylonian Radanites. And so the Rothschilds paid for it because they needed to have that, because the money flowed through the Masons. Money flowed through the Knights of Malta. And so the British created their own Knights of Malta, in contradistinction to the Catholic Knights of Malta. And in contradistinction to the Vatican Bank that couldn't charge usury, then all these other banks started. And then when they started loaning money for wars, they became so wealthy that they controlled the city-states of Italy. All of them were all controlled by banking families. And most people don't know this. Some of those old banking families, for instance, Bank of America, that was the largest Italian banker who came to America, who named his bank the Bank of America. And so we go through every single one of these people, and we show you the entire migration of the Babylonian Radanites and the way they kept disguising their names and changing their names and naming themselves after the Jewish ghetto they had to live in. By the way, those ghettos didn't pay taxes, and they were the tax collectors even to this day. In Britain, the Radanites the Radhans, but these knights, they were the tax collectors, and they collected the taxes with a sword. Okay? So, and they would rough you up. You had to pay your taxes, or else it was worse than going to jail. They would just take violence out on you right there in the spot. So these warlord bankers have been on both sides. The Rothschilds have been on the both sides of all wars in America, period. And that we prove it. And it's in the book, and we give you lots of evidence, and we've done lots of intelligence reports on this. But then you need to know who the other bankers are, and you need to know who the Rothschild agents are. But if you're going to say it's the Illuminati, you're wrong. Adam Weishaupt's Masonic rite, called the Brothers of the Light, the Illuminati, the Brothers of the Light, never once ever did a full practice. It was never finished. So if you're telling me that the Illuminati control the world today, you are not done your homework. If you tell me the Committee of 300 rules the world today, then you got caught up in what some theorists came up with, and that's not true. You need to get the real facts. There is a what is it called? The Committee of the Isles, or the anyway. We revealed that too. So some of these things just get confused. But the reality is that the bankers went from basically the Babylonian Radanites. They did go to the Ashkenazi, and the Ashkenazi went into Europe, and they became literally the bankers of Europe. And so through Italy, it started at literally inside of the church. St. Mark's was where the first banks in Italy were started, and those were all Jews, and they all could charge interest. And pretty soon, other families said, "Well, we'll charge interest, but we won't be a Catholic. We won't be anything." And so you then get these Italian bankers who, to this very day, have more power than you can possibly imagine. And the only place you're going to find it that I know of is in this book and in our research, along with Michael McKibben and some of the research we've done with him. So these secret societies are quite real, folks. They're quite real. And the worst one is the Pilgrim Society. Let's just mention that. Cecil Rhodes, a Brit, he wants to have an imperialistic world of hegemony for only white people speaking English. So he gets together 3 of the richest people in the world. All 3 were Rothschilds, and they started Cecil Rhodes Roundtable. That then went into Milner's Roundtable, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. It went into Tavistock. It went into then the Council on Foreign Relations in America. And basically, it is the ruling group. It's a secret society. We're about the only people who will tell you about the Pilgrim Society. It is not a club for ambassadors. That's nonsense. So these groups still continue, but if you think it's the Bilderbergers, you're wrong. If you think it's the Bohemian Grove, you're wrong. If you think it's the Trilaterals, you're wrong. If you think it's the World Economic Forum, you're wrong. All of those are fronts. The real people don't go to those meetings. The real people don't show their face and their long lineages of banking corporatist families. And so you can also look at the example of the Republic of Venice, the Doge. The Doge was like a pope. He had the power to kill anybody in his group. If he voted that you were dead, you're dead. And there was 3 around him, and that's what Rhodes did, Cecil Rhodes. And then there's 10 around them, and they control that city-state. And it's these rich Italian families. Well, this control, it's now, okay, their name is not Rothschild, and it's not Bauer, and it's not even Bacharach. They change their names based upon where they live, and it's a way to disguise who they are. And many people subsume the concept, and it's only a concept, that they're Ashkenazi Jews because that makes them part of the inner group of the richest people in the world. You see how that works? Very, very simple. And they're the ones who started the central banks. Central banks are just like Babylonian debtor prison. We're going to loan a country money, and we're going to give them the currency they need. And then we're going to charge interest on it, and they won't be able to pay back the interest. So every single year they're going to owe us more money. And every year their currency is going to be, they're going to need to add currency because currency leaves the country. So as currency leaves the country, you have to Ask the people who loan you the money to give you some more currency. So they're being paid that way. They're also being paid on the interest, plus you can't pay the interest back, plus the interest is compounded. So we owe 35 trillion to a bunch of British bankers. No one will tell you who owns the US Federal Reserve, as far as I know, besides our research. This book will tell you that. It'll also tell you who the military industrial complex is. It'll also tell you who steals the patents. It'll also tell you how the people in control got their power and control and why they all know about it and common people don't know anything about it, because the propaganda of the British is so powerful that they pay people like Ariel and Will Durant to write histories saying that the British are just as clean as they could possibly be. Driven Snow, Carroll Quigley, he was paid to hide the Pilgrims. Eustace Mullins, he's one of the few people. And where did he get his ideas? He got them from Ezra Pound, and they kept Ezra Pound locked up in Washington, D.C. until he died because he knew too much. So if you know too much, these people have a way of making sure that you don't spread the word. So the Bank for National Settlement, derivative banking, all the economic tools, all these different bankster tricks, all of those things come out of stock markets. All of those things come out of these original tendencies to turn from religion and to turn temples into banks. And temples that were saving people's souls and their spirits become banks, commerce banks that start war, lock people up, tax them, and kill them. So this is a very, very sad thing I'm telling you, and it's the reason that we've waited all this time to tell you. But if you want to know the truth of the matter, it's there. And if you want to know the antidote for all of this, it's in this book also. And so I give you the prayers for protection from St. Benedict, from the short rites of exorcism. And these work. I've seen them work. I know they work. But the deal is, they cannot, even economically, they can turn you into a robot, into a transhuman automaton cyborg who works 5 days a week and on the weekend, passes out into hedonism as your counterbalance to the evil of the work you're doing that you hate. So it's simple. Do the work that you love. Do not give yourself over to these systems. Know what the systems are. Curtail your involvement with them. As the Bible says, have no associations with the unfruitful works of darkness, nay, but reprove them. So we are reproving them. We're calling them out into the light, and this scum, these vampires, these parasites die in light. Why do you think vampires die in light? And what are they trying to do? Steal your blood. What is your blood? That's your ego. That's your spirit. That's what you do with your life. So when you understand this, you will have a chance to really get yourself out of economic slavery, get yourself out of the bankruptcy of wisdom that the churches are promulgating, and to turn yourself to the true beauty of the spirit. Because as Diotima taught Socrates, she basically says, you don't have to worry about the truth and beauty as long as you're doing good, because good has truth and beauty in it. But if you have truth, you may not be doing the good. You may have beauty and you may not be doing the good. But if you're doing good, you're doing both of the other two. So as so many great spiritual teachers say, simply love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, your first job is to find out who God is and love God with your heart, your mind, your soul, your spirit, and to love God because God is not easily seen. God and all these different spiritual beings are invisible. Well, evil used to be invisible, but now evil is proud to show its face in public, and so is God. So we are being given more help now to fight these demons than we've ever been given in all of human history. We have entered the Satya Yuga, the light age, the age of light. And so we are truly at a stage where those who wish to advance can advance faster than ever before. And those who are unconscious are being basically hypnotized and pulled down into living darkness, And this living darkness is exactly what is described as demon worship from ancient Babylon. So don't be fooled, folks. And don't think that you can conquer evil either. You can, in fact, conquer evil in yourself, and that conquers evil outside of yourself. It's an automatic thing. Just like I said, when you create a specter, a phantom, or a demon, it creates elemental beings. Well, every time you pray for protection or for an exorcism or for those spiritual beings to help you, it's the same thing. It empowers you and it gives you truth, beauty, and goodness.